Well, I thought, 10 years, that's kind of impressive for a conference, but it also occurs to me that there's been a certain part of my technical life that I've been experiencing as pure liquid hate for at least that long. So I thought I'd tell you a story. Long time ago, Shadowcat far, far away, allow me to present Orm Wars. And yes, I am going to stretch this joke to breaking point and beyond. Superglue may be required. So, if you're going to start somewhere, you may as well start in the worst place possible. Happily, they gave that an appropriate number. So, episode 1, the Seapan Menace. When Shadowcat very originally started, we were using this appallingly idiotic in-house framework. I can't say enough bad things about it apart from the fact that it has been a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful learning experience in terms of I have subsequently been able to make decisions based on, did I do it in that one? If so, never do that again. And then, so from there we thought, I know what would be a fantastic idea. This seems to be popular at the moment. Let's use Maypole, which brought along with it Maypole, which we all know, and I really don't want to finish that sentence. Which, because you have the whole problem of Maypole and Apache 1, Maypole 1, you can only have a module loaded once across the thing. So if you want to have two similar but slightly different code bases, you need two different package names. So obviously I did the only sensible thing. I generated it with Template Toolkit. Of course, because, one sensible thing has to be balanced out, there was also XML and XSLT in there, but let's just not think about that. And then after a year or so, I was digging around on Seapan and went, this looks interesting. Maybe this will be slightly less stupid than Maypole. And lo and behold, it was slightly less stupid than Maypole, and the world became a significantly less screwed up place for me. Took another year or so before we could actually convince customers that they should be using that, but that's fine, these things happen. This is the glory of being a consultant. The fundamental principle is, I will drag you kicking and screaming into the future, and in the end, you may not thank me, but so long as you pay your invoice, it's all good. But throughout all three of these, and some straight CGI.pm code I'd written previously, there was one common factor throughout. One might say, though, it wasn't so much a common factor as a lowest common denominator. Ladies and gentlemen, Class DBI. I'm hoping that quite a few of the people here have now successfully avoided it or largely forgotten it. To those of you who avoided it, congratulations. To those of you who've forgotten it, I'm about to remind you. It was admittedly one of the very first ORMs. It dates back to the same sort of era as DBIX search program. So, all of those mistakes in there, if I hadn't already known they were mistakes, I'm sure I would have made. Several of them I managed to make again repeatedly, so, all glory to the people who built the thing, but, single column primary keys. I think because when it was originally written, nobody had told Schwern that a primary key could be more than one column. Basic hash search, so if you wanted I can generate a where clause. Well, I can generate this where clause. Can't generate anything else. Joins, ooh, fancy stuff. I mean, this was, these were the days of MySQL 3.23. Joins were something to be afraid of most of the time. However, Class DBI's attitude to joins was, what's a join? So, if you want to do anything other than absolutely basic things, what did you do? Well, you got to make your acquaintance, the acquaintance of I'm a DBI. And yes, that's an incredibly silly name, and quite frankly I find that quite appropriate, because to be entirely honest, so far as Class DBI went, I'm a DBI was kind of the Jar Jar Binks of the situation. It provided a magnificent thing called set SQL. Yes, if you wanted anything more than a simple where clause, you now got to rewrite the entire query. Hard-coded everywhere. Oh, except you didn't quite have to hard-code it, because you could supply a name for the SQL chunk, and then special double underscore tokens that got replaced with appropriate bits. And yes, it did that with a regex. Yes, it was about as fun as it sounds. But wait, what if there wasn't a double underscore replace for it? Well, I'm a DBI had you covered, because you could do that. Yep. Extensible. Web scale. Anyway. Seriously, this was not pleasant. So let's kind of move on from there as quickly as possible. So episode 1A, there is a reason for this. The fans did it to the original. And so did we. So episode 1A, the Chanson edit. Christian Hansen, who was a Core Catalyst contributor way back in the day, unfortunately quit because, well, fundamentally the Catalyst contributor team was rotating set of people, Sebastian Riedel, and people who smoked enough weed to tolerate Sebastian Riedel. But Chanson wrote a thing called Class DBI Suite, and that provided a caching layer and integrated SQL abstract for the where clause. So you could write a search expression like that. It actually produced an OR in the query. Seriously, this was like high technology back in about 2005. It was just like, oh wow, this is so much cooler. And then came a challenge, which happened from the traditional thing of somebody saying, oh, active record style include. Can't be possible in that API. Wait, you just said something was impossible in an IRC channel full of Perl hackers? Really? Took me 2 days. Added join and prefetch support. The names may be familiar to some of you. They were originally implemented in Class DBI Suite. However, it was still Class DBI, so the internals the Class DBI internals were either on too many drugs or not enough. Seriously. And we also had the problem of, because it had, such a complete lack of feature set, most of the production users had hacked it to pieces, monkey patched it, poked into the internals, violated the abstractions, violated it pretty much every way you can imagine, and some that I strongly recommend you don't ever imagine. The classic Uber version of that being the absolute horror form known as BookingDB. But at least Booking had the kindness to fork it, so we didn't have to support their intent. Everybody else, though, if you fixed a bug, you'd break at least 3% of production code bases. This was not helpful, and was basically curtains for being able to keep extending Class DBI. Which brings us on to episode 2, the attack of the clone, wherein I started off by copying the entire Class DBI test suite into a new directory, did a search and replace for all of the package names, and then built DBIX class and DBIX class CDBI compat at the same time. I never honestly really cared that much about whether anybody used CDBI compat. I just cared that I got to steal their test suite. Spent a couple of days hacking, released a 0.01, And then the Class DBI community spectacularly imploded, down to the absolutely fine moment where I decided to mirror the wiki that had been taken offline, got sent a letter saying, I own some of that content, I'm going to sue you if you leave the wiki up. So I replaced my thing of the wiki with the takedown notice, and then I got another email saying, I didn't give you permission to publish that, I'm going to sue you if you leave up the takedown notice. Fun times. Anyway, in the end, I didn't get sued, I just stopped caring about Class DBI. And then, but of course, because of all of this, lots of people were like, there's probably never going to be another release. There's no wiki and no mailing list anymore. And they all started using DBIC. So suddenly, what was meant to be a research project to explore future directions for a major release of Class DBI, suddenly had a user base. And the worst thing was, because I was just doing snapshot releases, because hey, experimental research project, what do? People deployed random cups of SVN trunk into production! You have no idea how much that scared me. So I did the only thing possible other than killing all the users, which would have taken far too much time and involved far too much laundry. We went to a stable release cycle. And then a bit later on, I was refactoring a bunch of stuff, trying to reduce the dependence on class methods and class data. I hate class data. It's a hidden global variable. This is not Java. We have global variables, just use one. And in the process of this, accidentally invented the results set API. So for all of you who've spent several months going, I don't get this, I don't get this, I don't get this. Hey, chaining search calls is pretty cool actually. I do know how you feel because I was actually the first one to experience that moment because I didn't realise what I'd invented to begin with. So development continued, various contributors. Over time the architecture started to grow at the seams a little bit as it does. But at this point, the backwards compatibility constraints meant that trying to do a complete refactor was a really dangerous thing. So I started thinking about where do I go to do this properly. Things like, there were certain problems like, if you have a search, okay. Say you have a post with comments, right? So your comment has a creator, comment has a post has a creator. DBIX class, as Sweet did originally, alias is based on the relationship name. So if you ask for a set of joins like that, what you end up with is the post stable alias to post, and then because it's got two creators, it sticks _2 on the second one. Now, can we see the slight problem here? Which one is which? Okay, if you've just built it up as a single search call, you know. But if you're trying to chain searches together that are adding joins on, you end up in a situation where it's completely non-deterministic which alias you get. The thing is, SQL abstract, because it's basically Dwim syntax straight through to SQL in a single pass, it's not introspectable. You can't interrogate the tree without reproducing all of the Dwim code, in theory. Yeah, pretty much. So I started thinking about how to fix that. Meanwhile, episode 3, Revenge of the Reba Sith. Is Reba in here? You!
He's not your father.
He's not your father. He is his brother though.
We were keeping it for episode 7 for the Disney release.
Oh God.
Matt is never Disney safe.
Yep, and you're going to be the princess.
Why do I grow this hair?
I assume the USSR didn't have hairdressers.
Meanwhile, back at the slides.
Back at
But by this point, we were getting into quite a substantial number of problems. Basically, all of which were that databases are hateful. And thus was born DBIHacks.pm. DBIHacks.pm is the reason I'm calling him Rebasith, because it is seriously the dark side of DBIHacks class. Oh yes, because what it does is it uses non-printable characters as the identifier quote characters so that they can be recognised, builds a regex to match them, and then renders through to the SQL, because you can't introspect SQL abstract, and regex the SQL to figure out what tables and columns are involved. Yeah? Okay, I have just crossed the streams here, but... yeah, I mean, the really scary part is there's quite a lot of people in this room who have been using this in production for years without actually realising the horrors that lie beneath. That was the idea. When he originally proposed this, I said, yeah, you can do that if you think it'll work, but it's not allowed to ever become my problem. So I did, for several years, successfully avoid discovering the horrors that lay beneath. Right up until the point where I needed to rewrite the... Anyway. But it was sadly necessary, basically because databases as a concept are really awesome. Databases, the actual implementations, are universally evil and want you to die. As an example, a sensible database. The hell happened there? Never mind. Okay, that's completely wrong. But a sensible database will provide a limit and an offset keyword. Most people have worked with a limit and offset keyword. How does the NCSQL standard text say? You need to do that. So if you're set up on a database that doesn't support limiting any other way, DBIX class has to figure out the identifiers involved so it can do a double-wrapped subquery just to get you a limit. Yay! I do not write an ORM. DBIX class has produced enough casualties. You do not have the spare sand points. Weaver and I merely happen to be capable of surviving with a negative sand score. But it does work. I can tell that it works by the huge number of passing test cases that I've spent far too much time making pass again against other code. In the meantime, I was actually starting to get somewhere with my plans, which brings us to the new hope. The new hope is going to be called data query, and I know I've been talking about this for years. That's because it's taken me years to manage to figure something out that will actually work with all those batshit insane bloody database implementations. The idea is query is a data structure, not a Dwin structure, but an actual explicit data structure. An explicit data structure that you can actually introspect, that you can actually do functional transforms on.
You've invented the abstract syntax tree.
I've usually been referring to it as an abstract query tree because every time I say abstract syntax tree, somebody goes, so where's the parser? It's a hashref! I don't need a parser! It's called Perl! So the expression for that looks more like that. So you have an operator node, says what sort of operator it is, value node, not really that complicated. And no, you're not expected to write that. The point of that is to be sensible for computers to transform and only incidentally possible for humans to read. So I wrote SQL Abstract Converter, which takes SQL Abstract expressions and then renders them through to a data query tree. Which is more interesting than it looks, because, okay, you're always saying SQL Abstract is full of dwim and not amazingly consistent. If you want to express this, you can write it with an array ref. You can write it with an array ref of hash refs. You can write it explicitly using -or, and you can do it explicitly using -or and then use an array ref anyway. And you can see why I didn't want to introspect this, right? But all of those produce the same data query tree. At which point people can use whichever subset of the dwim syntax fits their head still, but I end up with something consistent I can actually write code against. It's wonderful, really. Anyway, so 2011 I got SQL Abstract itself initially ported. And DBIX class exploded completely. This is because DBIX class violates SQL Abstract's encapsulation somewhat. Largely because for the first 4 years of using it, the SQL Abstract author was able, so we couldn't actually do any patches to be able to add to the encapsulated API. And then of course with the advent of DBI hacks, we didn't so much violate the encapsulation as just violate it full stop. If a CPAN module could take out a restraining order, DBIX class development would have stopped years ago. So I rewrote the relevant parts of the DBIX class internals. That slide expanded to an entire talk full of swearing a couple of years ago. And then we get back to limit dialects, and oh, for crying. So I had to manage to get those working on the data query side. That took me most of 2012. Finally got it all to basically work, and thought, hey, this is excellent. Maybe now I've just spent 2 years porting DBIC, maybe I can start adding a couple of features. No. Now before I get on to why, a small aside. I have some reluctance about shipping data query as a standalone distribution as yet. Because there's lots of API stuff that may need fine-tuning. So what we ended up deciding to do instead is create a module called tempextlib. And what tempextlib does is figures out where it lives in the lib tree. I hate tape mode. I hate tape mode. This is my own file name. I know what it is. You put the right path in ink yourself. Why is it tainted? The best part being, of course, because of the way the taint stuff works, the unshift would pass without that little regex hack, and then the next time it tries to load something, you get the incredibly helpful error message, insecure dependency in require. Personally, I start to think that taint mode and require are more codependent than dependent. But so what it does is adds underscore tempextlib to the front of that ink, which then means we can bundle versions of data query and SQL Abstract straight in there, so that we've got the exact right versions we expect, and so that we've not already shipped the lowest layer. Because data query could theoretically ship, but right, I just need to make this very clear, right? Data query, while it's mostly stabilized, is still something that we're going to have to tweak. Yeah? The last time I said this is a research project, you put Subversion Trunk into production against your main customer databases. So no, I do not trust you anymore. Anyway, getting back to the point, episode 5. Try to merge down from master. Try to merge down from master and discovered the DBI hacks had been almost entirely rewritten.
Right back at you.
I did briefly try to rebase. I got about two patches in, cried a lot, went for a smoke, came back, tried again, cried a lot, concluded that this was more rebasediality than rebasing. And it just wasn't going to happen. So I went through the set of changes and thought, okay, I have to come up with a new plan here. So my new plan was to take all of the SQL maker and SQL abstract changes from the old branch, dump them over the top of a new branch from current master, and force commit. And then I went back to what do I need to do to DBI hacks to make my test suite pass? Again! Yeah. The landlady of the Yorkshire house thanks you for the increase in her custom. This time I minimised the changes to DBI hacks in order to make it at least vaguely possible to merge in case he did something batshit insane to me again. Which did somewhat work. Of course, it does now mean that DBI hacks is data query and regular expressions. But it's now relatively viable. It makes my eyes bleed. Sorry, after 2 hours with DBI hacks, I go back and read the source code to Matt Script Archive form mail to clean my brain. Got to mostly green. Remaining test fails that I'm suffering from are some obscure bits in the limit dialects where I'm convinced the SQL I'm generating is equivalent, but when basically a simple query becomes a page and a half of SQL, going through it and being absolutely certain is not quite as easy as it might first appear. There's also a slight problem in terms of the exception handling, where DBIX class has a system that's designed to basically make sure you get relatively useful stack traces, so it reports which bit of DBIX class threw the exception and where in your code you made the call that caused it to throw the exception. Which is a great idea, and Fru was kind enough to factor it out for us. And then Reba Sushi took one look at the factored out version and said, this is completely wrong. But it's a faithful factoring out. He said, yes, clearly I was a teapot when I wrote this. I have yet to determine what that means. I suspect what's going to happen is I'm going to look at the rewritten version and go, yes, you are a teapot. But until he gets around to rewriting it, for those of you watching from home, somebody's just put a giant tea cozy on Reba Sushi's head. He actually looks less silly as a result. It's most impressive. So, I'm thinking, how do I stop master being destroyed again? Tried that. Couldn't get the carbonite. Most disappointing. Thought that I'm thinking, okay, right, look, I need to get this guy out, at least partially out of circulation for just a couple of months. While I remember how to deal with code without screaming, because I should actually occasionally turn up to the office without my co-workers going deaf. And the eventual solution was to recruit him to Of course, as a result of this, he's now blaming me for the carp thing not being rewritten, but Doesn't matter. I have breathing room. Which gets me on to episode 6, the return of the JFDI. I can actually do stuff now. Okay, so DBIX class is running on top of data query in a branch. Again, crossing the streams into a different franchise. The current branch is DQ2EB. Maybe 2 of you will get that reference, the rest of you are probably glad you haven't. Anyway, so it's sort of like, now what? Well, let's see what we can add. So, first thing, I've never been a huge fan of the SQL abstract syntax. It's fine, but I'd quite like to be able to at least pretend that I'm thinking in Perl here. So, data query expr declare, which is part of the bundle, gives you an expr export. That means that you can write that instead. So you basically do $_ alias name, column name. If you've got an AND query, you can write that as well. Now, some of you are probably going, huh? Single ampersand? Well, the thing is, single ampersand can be operator overloaded. Double ampersand can't. It is possible to pretend double ampersand is overloaded. Anton Berezin's DBIX Perlish does it. It does it by loading B and walking the octree of the submachine. I considered this and came to the conclusion that we had entered one of these rare situations where actually auto-load and operator overloading is less crack than the alternative. I also wanted to try and make it possible in relationship declarations. So, because relationship declarations use a non-standard syntax that is not the SQL abstract syntax, that just allows you to specify equality joins. This is because, entirely honestly, in 2005, when I first implemented it, I had never yet reached the point where I needed any sort of join other than an equality join. Also, 640k would be enough for everybody. So, if you want to produce, say, join on one equality and a greater than, you get to write this. Isn't it beautiful? The idea being, that version is a version that goes into the on clause, and then if you already have a row object, that allows you to create a version that has direct names into the SQL. So if you're going from an object you already have, you can load related objects without needing a join. Which is nice. I mean, basically this is what DBIX class resolves the equality join syntax to internally. But it's still, I can write this, I have no problem with it. Reba can write this, he has no problem with it. Every time a user on #DBIX class tries to write this, we spend 3 hours going, no, read the documentation, try writing syntactically valid Perl, think. Okay. Dude, you're 0 for 3 so far, can you at least try one of them? And so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, and sod it. Now you can write that. And because that renders through to a data query tree, I can walk the tree and basically generate both of those forms. Which is substantially less painful to write. More importantly, it's hugely less painful to support so far. That will probably change once this actually has users, of course. Never mind! Anyway, the other thing, grep cache. Grep cache is fun. Because you see, the thing is, okay, DBIX class doesn't cache anything by default because cache coherency is hard. I have on several occasions when people go, why don't you do caching? I've gone, okay, give me a proposal for an API to manage cache coherency. And they give me a proposal and an example config. And then I demonstrate that every single time you can implement the same cache coherency logic they want outside of DBIX class in less code than it would take to configure the cache coherency system they're proposing. So we don't have one yet. But you can specifically ask want a result set to cache its results. This is fine. The thing is, as soon as you do a search on a subset, hey look, SQL abstract introspection, what's that? Let's do a second query. Which, okay, fair enough, it works. But if you wanted to cache that query because it's expensive, this is probably not optimal. So what I've done is, we have a grep cache attribute. You can still use SQL abstract syntax in search, because as soon as DBIX class gets hold of that search clause, it immediately pushes it through the converter and turns it into data query. Because fuck trying to make this work with SQL abstract. Once I've got a data query tree, data query was designed to have multiple backends. So I built a Perl backend that evals like that. At which point, you only get a single query because it just runs the cache from the last result set through the grep. Seriously, I have wanted this feature for about 5 years. And finally, it basically works. Only for very simple conditions. If DBIX class isn't very sure that it can render the condition into Perl that's going to be equivalent to the SQL, it does the only sensible thing, which is throw a fat exception saying, bad developer, don't do that. Gets hilarious when you try and do, it works perfectly on SQLite and on Postgres. It does not currently work perfectly on MySQL. Because they're wonderful people, they decide, it's the standard thing with MySQL, yeah? They don't follow the ANSI standard at all, except when the ANSI standard is batshit insane. Then they follow it perfectly. So, MySQL, your default collation is not just case insensitive, it ignores trailing white space. So in order to reliably recreate MySQL's equals operator, I have to fold case everything and then pad it. I have implemented that, it's not wired up, but it is implemented and it does have tests. Wiring it up and actually running it against MySQL, somebody else can do. Every time I start doing it, I start feeling ill. What else? Okay, the thing that I've always been really interested in is being able to form queries in terms of your object graph that still translate into what you wanted relationally. So I have a method called where. Imaginative naming as always. The idea of this is there is absolutely no way to provide semantic style querying in search without running into inconsistency in lots of cases. And the more subtle the case, the more likely it is to exist in a 4-year-old dark pan code base whose maintainer is left or committed suicide. So we really can't risk breaking that. But the idea here is you pass where an expression saying I want the name to be name, and it automatically prepends the alias for your current topic. So in the normal case, you'll get where me.name equals, which cures one of the traditional things, where somebody joins in another table with a name column and wonders why their search breaks. Better still, when we traverse a join using search related, because DBIC tracks what the right alias is, I can still generate the right where clause. This makes me happy. It actually knows what's going on to some vague extent, which is more than I do by this point, believe me. The other thing is column mapping. Column mapping because that. I'm sure everybody's seen a schema with a column naming convention that was obviously designed by a DBA who hated you. So I have a column attribute, and you say, this is what I would like to pretend it was called when I'm using the semantic interface. And provided you pass that, when you pass name equals something to the where, you actually get the stupid column name in the SQL without having to pollute your Perl with the DVAs. I'm trying to think of a metaphor that doesn't involve the DVA jacking off over the database schema, but I can't. Well, actually, no, I can, but those metaphors are worse. Let's just next slide. The other thing is handling relationship mapping. So if you remember the comment post and owner example before, you do post owner and name, and it goes, you didn't join those yet. If you already joined them, it will reuse them. This is not active record. It was not written by DHH. It does actually have some comprehension of what a database is. We don't think foreign keys are legacy. Insert entire rants about most ORMs on the planet here. And it will expand out to requesting the appropriate join and generating the right where clause. And if you end up calling both of these, what it does is joins using an array ref, which means that the data query code knows what order DVIX class is going to pick the aliases in. At which point I know what the final alias is going to be, and I can actually produce the right alias for the right thing. Finally. So writing that produces owner.name and owner2.name with the bind values in the right place. And because this is cooperating with the main DVIC join system, you can combine it. So if you have a result set that already has a search, which is the real problem. If the result set already has a search, you have no idea what aliases you're going to get unless you know exactly where that result set came from. But if you're using the semantic API, it walks the internal data structures and will still actually do the right thing. So result set chaining for the cases this covers has just become significantly less annoying. Obviously, this all comes into the category of experimental as in mad science, experimental as in here be dragons and things worse than dragons, and experimental as in I am allowed to change the API in this, especially in what.
So you're saying we should run this in production, right?
I'm saying I put so many warnings on it this time that if you do that, I am going to point and laugh if it eats your data.
What's the point? You're going to put code in to make sure it eats your data.
No, that's not
Reaver will do that.
And it's all incomplete. Expressions are only accepted in the places that I pointed out. Because there's all sorts of weird and hilarious inconsistencies in the internals of various other bits of the API. Largely because there's weird and hilarious inconsistencies in the external API as specified because I screwed up the design 7 years ago and people are now relying on it. But this stuff works so far. Barring discovering more epically stupid mistakes than I'm already assuming I'm going to discover, at least some form of this will make it into the production release. But no, most things don't accept exploits yet, but the things that do actually accept them and try and do the right thing with them. I have passing tests that demonstrate it doesn't get it completely wrong. I fully expect that within 2 days of Reba Sushi playing with it, I will have lots of failing tests pointing out the things it does get wrong. But we'll get there. We're getting somewhere. But it does work. It does work, it is possible. And we're finally starting to get some of the advantages of having a traversable tree internally. Which is nice, given I started on data query in 2008. So this would now be over a decade of hating databases and half a decade of hating trying to figure out data query. Still, it works. I keep repeating that to myself. Sometimes it even helps. So, if you want to play with this, Development work is going on Data Query Master, on the DQ branch of SQL Abstract, and on the Data Query to Electric Boogaloo branch of DBIX class.
So we can put that in our CPAN file now, yeah?
Here's the answer.
Well, actually, there's this thing, you know. If I'm going to go to all this trouble, the Empire must demand more. And in any case, you know, even an episode 6 has to ship one day. So, earlier today, I pushed the first dev release to CPAN. Still, the first dev release, there were a bunch of tests for obscure things to do out, so it is very much warning, Battle Station may not be fully operational. But if you come along to #DBIX class, we'll slaughter a few bosoms and see what we can do to help. Please have a play with this. See if this API actually makes some sense somewhere outside of my brain. Because I've been hacking on this for so long, I'm not even sure which way is up anymore. And frankly,
That's the wrong way.
yes, that's probably true of most database implementations.
Yeah, but then there's MySQL, isn't there?
But no, install it, give it a go, break it, come and report the bugs. Thank you very much.
Did you not say the time you did the last 3 first? Then you would have solved it. And you all fuck about with this, I might blame you all to stop and go in and say,
Going?
other people like, delay, I think was the word. I did not ask really well.
I believe that puts me on time. So rather than trying
Who are you? Where did you get that excellent Matt Trout disguise?
So rather than attempting to do questions, because every time I try and do questions about data querying, I either get blank looks from shell-shocked people, or an Oracle DBA going, this is all very interesting, but I don't see how it helps me handwrite PLPGSQL, which we spent 10 minutes on last year. It eventually took me and 4 audience members to get to repeat the words, "It's not designed for that." So instead, I'm going to wander out and have a cigarette. If you do have questions, you're absolutely welcome to come and ask me them there. But I'm going to go sit down and try and give myself cancer. Because frankly, that's an improvement on DBI hacks. Cheers.